My dad's affair and the family he shattered, a daughter's journey through betrayal, and healing, Chapter 1. The moment he walked away. I'm Eva, 28 years old and a new mom. If you had told me a year ago that in the midst of learning to care for my first baby, I'd also lose my father to an affair, I would have laughed. My family life had always been complicated, but never did I expect an explosion like this. My dad's decision to leave my mom happened at the worst possible time, when my baby was just 3 weeks old. I can still picture the day it happened. My child, Hannah, was crying in the bassinet while I was in a haze of sleepless nights and constant feedings. My mom had driven over to help me with the newborn, cooking, cleaning, offering me a few minutes to rest. Dad was supposed to come too, but he never showed. After we put Hannah down for a short nap, Mom got an alarming text. "We need to talk. I'm moving out." She stared at her phone, eyes wide. "It's from your dad," she said, her voice trembling. My heart pounded with confusion. Why on earth would he move out? We'd heard no prior talk of him feeling trapped or wanting space. Sure, he could be distant at times, but nothing suggested he'd up and leave his wife of 30 years. Yet here he was, dropping the bomb by text. Mom read the message a second time, tears forming. I was overwhelmed. My baby was stirring from her nap, hungry, and I was reeling at the thought that my father might be deserting us. In a single second, the security of my childhood, the idea of my parents as steady grandparents to Hannah, cracked. I felt robbed of a peaceful postpartum period, robbed of the comfort that I'd have my full family supporting me. We tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. By evening, he hadn't come home to the house I grew up in. Mom worried he might have had an accident, but I suspected something else. There was a chill in my stomach, a vague sense that he was stepping out for reasons we couldn't fathom. The next day, he showed up to the family home only to collect some clothes, ignoring Mom's tearful pleas for an explanation. He just said, "I need space," loaded a suitcase into his trunk, and drove away. That was the last we saw of him for weeks. Chapter 2. New motherhood and family turmoil. My baby's name is Hannah. She's my first child and my parents' first grandchild. I'd always imagined Mom and Dad cooing over her together, fighting over who got to hold her next. Instead, Dad's abrupt departure overshadowed everything. I found it impossible to fully enjoy Hannah's newborn phase. I was fighting back tears each time I saw Mom's hollow eyes, or each time I recalled that Dad was missing from the picture. I tried to keep my sanity by focusing on Hannah, the round cheeks, the tiny fingers gripping mine, the late night feedings. Mom did her best to help, but she was shattered when she wasn't rocking Hannah. She was staring blankly at the wall or texting Dad desperate messages, which he mostly ignored or answered curtly. I resented him for doing this at such a delicate time in our family's life. Couldn't he have waited until Hannah was older if he was determined to break away? That resentment quickly turned into suspicion. Why so sudden? Why so final? He refused any real conversation. My siblings, my older brother Mark and younger sister Alice, were equally baffled. We tried brainstorming reasons: mid-life crisis, secret gambling debts, a mental breakdown. None of us thought fair, at least not initially. Dad had always seemed so stern about loyalty. He'd raised us to condemn cheating. But ironically, that's exactly what happened. I remember a conversation with Mark, pacing in my living room while Hannah napped in her crib. Mark said, "Something's not right. Dad's not the type to just vanish." I nodded, tears welling up, lamenting that I needed Dad's supportive presence as a new mom. Mark insisted we give him time. "We might come around," he said. but my gut told me otherwise. This felt too final, too abrupt, like he had another motivation for leaving. Chapter 3, the grim truth emerges. Mom kept pressing Dad to see reason. They were married for so long, 30 years. And suddenly he wanted to blow it all up. Dad finally agreed to have a talk. Meeting Mom at a neutral cafe, she hoped they'd reconcile, or at least start couples therapy. He arrived looking tense, and the conversation apparently turned sore quickly. He insisted he'd lost himself, needed freedom. He still didn't mention another woman, but the distinct impression was that he was done with married life. Then, surprisingly, a few days later he told Mom he wanted to try working on their marriage. My siblings and I breathed a cautious sigh of relief. Maybe he just had a weird meltdown. I harbored a tiny flicker of hope that he'd step back into the role of father and grandfather, especially as Hannah was only a few weeks old. But that flicker was snuffed out fast. Mom discovered messages on his phone referencing a younger woman. She found hotel receipts. The pieces fell into place. He was cheating the entire time, even after claiming to work on the marriage. She confronted him, and he didn't deny it. Instead, he belittled her, told her it was her fault for letting the relationship stagnate. My siblings were incensed. I was livid. He never apologized or admitted wrongdoing, only spouted lines like, "I'm sorry you feel that way." So there it was. My father was cheating with a woman 20 years younger than him, all while my family was dealing with the first grandchild, my mother's heartbreak, and the illusions of working on it. I felt rage so deep my hands shook whenever I thought of it. He had ruined the joy of Hannah's newborn phase. Instead of pleasant memories, I had betrayal looming every time I recalled those early weeks of feeding her in the nursery. Chapter 4, trying to understand my father. Dad was 57 at that point. His new mistress was around 37. Younger than him, older than me, but the age gap felt unseemly. The woman knew he was married and still proceeded. It's not like Dad was some lonely bachelor. He had a stable family, loyal wife, and 3 adult kids, and a new granddaughter. Yet he torched all that for some fleeting affair. My relationship with Dad was never great. He was always a bit distant, more consumed with his job or his hobbies than actively fathering. Mark, Alice, and I joked that he didn't like kid stuff. He was never physically abusive or anything, but just absent, emotionally unavailable. Yet I believed that he was, at core, a decent guy who wouldn't betray the family. Now, I see that was naive. The moment he felt cold, faced with a granddaughter, he apparently fled into the arms of a younger woman to reclaim his youth. Rationally, I can see how men facing aging might chase a younger partner to feel alive. But it doesn't excuse his narcissistic refusal to own the hurt he caused. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he'd say, as if the problem was our sensitivity, not his betrayal. Classic manipulation. He never said, "I'm sorry for what I did." That stung me deeply. Chapter 5, the fallout and the silent siblings. Once the affair was out in the open, my siblings and I confronted him collectively. We arranged a meeting at Mark's place. Dad arrived with a defensive posture, arms folded, refusing to look me in the eye. Alice asked, "How could you do this to Mom after 30 years? And why now, of all times, when we have a new baby in the family?" He shrugged, mumbled something about falling out of love. He told us he was with the other woman now, living in an apartment, that she had 3 kids of her own who he claimed needed a father figure. That line hit me like a punch. He never was a great father to us, yet he'd step in for her kids. My blood boiled. Mark tried to keep it civil, reminding Dad that we exist, that he'd never even asked to see Hannah. Dad just said, It's complicated, refusing to elaborate. We left that meeting furious. I recall slamming Mark's door behind me. Alice sobbed, muttering how Dad always neglected us, but this was the final straw. We all agreed to cut contact unless Dad made a genuine apology or attempt to fix things. He didn't. Days rolled by, weeks. No calls from him. That's when I realized he truly didn't care if we forgave him or not. Chapter 6, the emotional abuse of Mom. All the while, Mom was stuck in a nightmare. She'd known him for decades, built a life together. She was blindsided, struggling to see how he could so casually toss her aside. During the reconciliation phase, he manipulated her, suggesting they try counseling, only to keep sleeping with the mistress. Mom was devastated upon discovering that deception. She told me in tears, "He gaslighted me. He made me think we could fix it, while he never stopped the affair. He mocked her requests for honesty. He belittled her in phone calls, calling her clingy and pathetic. That's emotional abuse, plain and simple." Hearing Mom's voice quiver whenever she recounted his cruelty enraged me. I wanted to shield her from his toxic presence. The marriage turned into a nightmare, with him blaming her, ignoring her pleas, humiliating her in front of family. Eventually, she initiated divorce proceedings. That path was messy, full of petty arguments over assets, but it concluded recently. The divorce finalized, we all breathed a collective sigh of relief. At least she was free from his control. Mom moved into a smaller condo near me, leaning on Mark, Alice, and me for support. We made sure she had company on weekends, stepping in as her emotional anchors. I worried about her mental health, but she stayed surprisingly resilient. Over time, her heartbreak hardened into quiet resolve. She once said to me, "The man I married is gone. If I'd known who he'd become, I'd have left sooner." That broke my heart, but also gave me hope that she'd heal. Chapter 7, my own anger and motherhood. While Dad was off playing father figure to someone else's kids, I wrestled with postpartum hormones, late-night feedings, and the rage at how he overshadowed Hannah's first weeks. I so wanted to relish her newborn stage without bitterness, but I couldn't think of those early memories without picturing Dad's betrayal looming in the background. I recall trying to nurse Hannah at 3 a.m., tears streaming down my cheeks, recalling how Dad walked out exactly around her birth. That wound festered in me. My fiancé tried to comfort me. Yes, I have a supportive partner, but I felt a unique heartbreak, losing the father I never fully had in the first place. At the exact moment I became a parent myself. The contrast stung. I was determined to be everything for Hannah that Dad never was for me. We decided not to let Dad see Hannah. Not that he asked anyway. If he had insisted on meeting her, I'd have refused. The thought of him holding my baby, faking grandpa vibes, made me nauseous. My siblings agreed. We'd shield the next generation from his toxic behavior. Let him play house with his mistress's kids, if that's what he wants, but he doesn't get to bounce in and out of our child's life. I dreaded the day Hannah might ask about her grandfather, but for now she was too young. My only comfort is that she'll never remember him, which might be for the best. Chapter 8, his life with the mistress's family. Reports trickled in from acquaintances. Dad moved in with his new goof after just 3 months of official dating. Though they'd been together much longer clandestinely, she had 3 children. They apparently got more fatherly attention from Dad in a few weeks than we got in decades. He took them out for ice cream, attended their school events. My siblings and I heard these stories with a mix of disgust and sadness. He was playing good dad to them while ignoring his actual children. The hypocrisy was maddening. I tried to rationalize it, Maybe he felt old when he saw me become a parent, so he latched onto a younger partner to recapture youth. Maybe he wanted a do-over, trying to be the father he never was. But that's no excuse for the emotional destruction he left in his wake. If he truly wanted to fix his parental failings, he could start by apologizing or at least acknowledging the damage done. But no. He vanished, taking no accountability, offering no closure. Once he texted me out of the blue. "I'm sorry you feel upset. We all have to move on." That line, "I'm sorry you feel that way," infuriated me. It's not a real apology, just a manipulative phrase implying the problem was my reaction, not his deed. I blocked him after that. We had nothing more to say. Chapter 9, The Relief of Finalizing the Divorce. Eventually, Mom's divorce was complete. She got a reasonable settlement, though Dad fought her on every penny. The day it finalized, we had a small family dinner. My siblings, me, Mom, and Hannah. We toasted to her newfound freedom, though tears glistened in her eyes. "I can't believe it ended like this," she whispered, "but I'm relieved." We all murmured in agreement. I realized Dad's absence at that table felt surprisingly normal. For years, he'd been more like a ghost than a fully engaged parent. Now that he was officially gone, we no longer tiptoed around his moods or tried to guess if he'd show up. That sense of finality was both heartbreaking and liberating. Hannah was about 5.5 months old by then, giggling in her high chair, oblivious to the family drama. I looked at her bright eyes, thinking, "Thank God you'll never remember how your grandpa betrayed us when you were newborn." That gave me solace. We planned a future holiday together. Just the four of us. Maybe traveling to the mountains for a short vacation. The idea lifted Mom's spirits, made us feel we could forge new traditions without Dad. Chapter 10, Reflecting on my childhood in the quieter moments. I wonder if Dad was always this selfish, or if he changed over time. My memory of him from childhood is a bit hazy. He was physically present, sat at the dinner table, sometimes asked how school was, but emotionally distant, never attending my school plays or sports events. Mark joked once that Dad's paternal instincts were under warranty and expired long ago. If he'd been a better father, maybe we'd have been more devastated by his departure. Instead, we mostly felt anger at how he destroyed Mom's heart and overshadowed Hannah's birth. My siblings each found their own ways to cope. Mark buried himself in work, Alice in travelling. I poured myself into motherhood, determined not to replicate Dad's emotional distance. I hug Hannah every chance I get, read bedtime stories, and vow to never let her doubt my presence. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't crave Dad's acceptance. Even after all he's done, a small childlike part of me yearns for him to say he's proud of me, that he loves me. That part feels betrayed and abandoned. Therapy helps me see that might be a wound I carry for life. Chapter 11, Why I'm choosing no contact. Some might ask if it's too harsh never to see him again. After all, he's my father, but the trauma he inflicted is too big. He never apologized, never attempted to repair the relationship. He continues acting like the victim, painting us as unforgiving. Meanwhile, he mentally abused Mom, hammered her self-esteem. He neglected me during a crucial postpartum phase, ignoring my newborn. He's content playing dad to his mistress's kids. Let him. He made that choice. I also don't want Hannah exposed to a man who treats family as disposable. I worry he might hurt her emotionally someday, too. If he can't show remorse for crushing my mother, why trust him with my daughter's heart? Protecting her is my priority. So, yes, it might be terrible to cut him out, but it's the healthiest choice for my mental well-being and for Hannah's future. I do struggle with guilt, imagining him older, alone, wanting to reconcile. But he's not alone. He's with his girlfriend and her 3 kids. If he truly regrets it all, he'd approach me differently. Yet I sense he's too narcissistic to face that humility. So I steel myself, reaffirming this no-contact stance. My fiancée supports me fully, my siblings do too. Mom, well, she's done with him, so we stand united. Chapter 12, moving on. My journey as a mother. Hannah's first birthday arrived. Mom, my siblings, close friends gathered for a small celebration. We decorated with pastel balloons, and Hannah tried cake for the first time, smearing frosting everywhere. The house echoed with laughter and love. For a split second, I remembered Dad's absence, how he'd never see her blow out that candle. But the longing faded, replaced by gratitude for those who were present. I realized I'm building a new family dynamic without him. A circle of supportive relatives, friends, my fiancé, all of us making sure Hannah grows up cherished. In a way, Dad's betrayal forced me to define what family really means. It's not just blood, but who shows up for you. He chose not to. Late that night, after the party ended, I tidied up the decorations. My fiancé found me in the living room, glancing at a stray balloon. He asked if I was okay. I felt a slight tug of sadness that Dad missed such a milestone. Then I realized, even if he'd been around, would he have truly cared? Probably not. That clarity sealed my resolve. I can't keep longing for a father figure he never was. I need to focus on who's here, who truly loves Hannah and me. Chapter 13, my mom's healing and future mom's transformation, has been both heartbreaking and inspiring. In the immediate months after Dad left, she was numb, weeping daily. But after the divorce, she grew stronger, discovered new hobbies. Gardening, painting. She confided in me that she felt like she'd wasted years on a man who never reciprocated her devotion. But she also said she's determined to find joy in her own life now. Sometimes she thanks Hannah for being her light. Through the darkness, holding her grandbaby eased her loneliness, gave her purpose. We talk often, sipping tea in her cozy condo. She no longer cries every night. Instead, she wonders if she might travel, or maybe try an online dating site eventually. I cheer her on, hoping she'll find real happiness with a partner who respects her. We used to revolve around Dad's moods, what he wanted, how he wanted it. Freed from that dynamic, Mom stands taller, a new spark in her eye. I never thought I'd see the day she'd feel relief from leaving Dad, but here we are. That's the silver lining. I guess his betrayal forced her to reclaim her independence. Chapter 14, encounters with extended family. Of course, extended family gatherings are awkward. My grandparents on Dad's side lament that he won't attend. They occasionally scold me. He's still your father. I respond politely that the door is open if he apologizes or shows accountability. But until then, I can't pretend all is fine. Some uncles or aunts blame me for making a bigger deal of it. I disregard them. They weren't in the trenches. Seeing how callously he abandoned Mom, let them have their opinions. Over the holidays we hosted a small dinner for Mom, my fiancé, siblings, plus some cousins supportive of our stance. No father. And it was lovely, peaceful, warm. Mark told me, "This is better than any forced family event with Dad ignoring us, right?" I nodded, feeling both sad and thankful. We can celebrate without tiptoeing around his arrogance. Occasionally rumors swirl Dad is engaged to his mistress, or they're expecting a child, or they're traveling. I stop reading those texts from well-meaning relatives. The day I found out he might be engaged, I felt a pang, like he replaced us fully. Then I remembered he was never present for me, so what am I losing? So I bury the pain, focusing on the love that remains in my life. Chapter 15, Coming to Terms with a Life Without Him. Hannah is now 2, a rambunctious toddler who squeals at the sight of balloons and stuffed animals. Mom adores being her grandmother, and my siblings love spoiling her. Each day, I watch my daughter grow, determined to give her a stable, nurturing environment. She'll never have memories of Dad in her life, never know him as Grandpa. Part of me mourns that lost relationship, not for me, but for the idea of a full extended family. But the reality is, we're better off without his toxicity. I've finally let go of the bitterness. It no longer consumes me. I see that Dad's actions reflect his own issues: insecurity about aging, narcissistic tendencies, inability to handle real responsibility. His affair with a younger woman was about him, not us. That's a liberating realization. I can't fix him, nor do I want to. When friends ask if I'll ever reconcile with Dad, I give them the simplest truth. He never apologized, never tried to make amends, and he's living his new life. I have no plans to see him. Maybe that's harsh, but it's also self-preservation. My fiancé stands by me, my siblings stand by me, and we're forging a life of honest connections. That's enough. Looking back, I still feel a twinge of sorrow that my dad overshadowed such a precious phase of my life, Hannah's newborn months, with his betrayal. But I've reclaimed those memories, focusing on the love that surrounded Hannah from my mom, siblings, and fiancé. She was, and always will be, my shining joy, untainted by his choices. So I stepped forward, raising my daughter with the values of empathy and loyalty. I vow never to take the path Dad chose. In the end, that's how I honor myself, my mother, and my child, by refusing to let his betrayal define us, our family, the real family.